Hi there, I'm Michelle the painter from Berkshire Paint and Sip, and this is Paint and Sip at Home. Alright, so today we're going to be painting Dazzling Daisy, and I'm going to be sipping a little grapefruit spike seltzer. So let's get painting and let's get sipping. So the materials that we're going to be using today is a 16 by 20 stretched prime canvas. You can get this at any of your local craft stores, and of course you can switch up the size, but I'm going to be using a 16 by 20. You'll need a cup of water for washing your brushes. You'll need a paper towel for drying your brushes. And I'm using 3 brushes today. I'm going to be using a number 10 flat brush. I'm using a 1-inch wide bristle brush, and I'm going to be using a number 6 round brush. I'm going to be using acrylic paints. The colors I'm using are ultramarine blue, titanium white, green oxide, chrome yellow, burnt umber, and this is a chrome orange. You can, again, certainly switch up the colors if you'd like, but these are the exact colors I'm using, and this is all you're going to need for your materials today. Alright, so the first step that we're going to be doing is the sky. It's going to come quite a ways down your canvas. You'll want to bring it almost maybe about 3/4 of the way down. I'm going to be using blue and white. I'm going to be using my 1-inch bristle brush, and I'm going to use both colors on my brush at the same time. And I'm going to be applying it in a circular fashion. So what I do here is, I do like to paint the edges of my canvas as well. What I'm doing is I want to get some different color variations throughout my sky. So I'm going to do some light areas and some dark areas. You'll find, as you're watching, you'll see that I kind of skip around throughout this sky just to give it some really dark areas. And then I'm just going to pick up white and kind of almost fill in those areas, but still blend it as I'm going with these circular motions. And I like my sky to get lighter as it goes down that canvas. So I'm going to be using more white on my brush as I go down towards that bottom of the sky. But I am continuing this circular motion as my main brush stroke as I'm going throughout this sky, so that way I have a consistent look throughout it. You could certainly do left to right or any other type of brush stroke that you're comfortable with, but my suggestion is if whatever you decide to do, you really stick with that brush stroke. I like to do these circles because I can easily have some really light areas and some really dark areas, and that way it emulates like rolling clouds. But again, you can switch it up as you see fit, but at some point I like to kind of mark where my sky is going to end, so that way I don't really have to think about it as I'm getting down towards the bottom of my canvas. I can just kind of go right to that spot and, you know, make sure I bring the entire sky down to that spot so I have a nice even area where my horizon is going to happen. And right now I'm just kind of going back through and making sure I hit all the areas. I want to fill in this spot here. But again, you can see that I've got some really light areas and some dark areas. I might accentuate it a little bit more before I finish here, but right now I'm just trying to get the entire sky covered. I'm going to float around here so I can get these other areas, make sure that they kind of work together and look like they belong together. But I do want maybe a little bit darker area in through here just to kind of make it look like there's another cloud going. And I'm just kind of improvising as I go because I like these skies to kind of form themselves. But, ooh, I don't want to lose that canvas there. So I want to get this to blend in a little bit. So all I'm doing right now is I'm still doing my circular motion. I'm using kind of a light touch, almost just the tip of my brush, like feathering it on, but still in that circular motion, so it looks like they all kind of blend together and they belong together. And if I needed to, if I felt like I went too dark anywhere, I could certainly come back with a little bit of white just to make maybe a fluffy bright cloud. But I'm kind of digging this as it is, a little bristle there that I'm trying to get off. Sometimes those bristles, they can get the best of you. But I'm just gonna kind of keep going here until I feel like I've got a nice blend. I wanna make sure that I've got the entire sky covered. You see me, my head is kind of backing away here a little bit. Sometimes just, stepping a little bit farther away from it can give you a better vantage point and can show you more of what the actual painting looks like, so you can make adjustments and tweaks as you see fit. Sometimes it's really difficult to see the painting when you're super close to it, so I like to kind of get myself a little a ways, and I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm going to prepare myself for the next step, and the next step is going to be done with this same brush, but I do need to wash it and dry it. So I'm going to wash and dry my bristle brush, and I'm going to get ready for the next step. So the next step that we're going to be doing, we're using the 1-inch bristle brush. We're going to be doing the first layer of the ground, or the grassy area. I'm going to be using yellow, green, and brown, and I'm going to be using the same circular motion that I used for the sky. It doesn't have to be any particular color order, but I do like the top of the grass to be a little bit lighter. So I'm going to start with yellow on my brush, and I'm going to just kind of get a little bit of that yellow in there, and now I'm going to put a little bit of green on my brush, and you can see I do get them to blend together a little bit. I want the top area of my grassy, where it lands or where it hits the sky, I want that to be a little rough looking, so I don't want to do a nice straight line, which is why I'm just using this circular technique. So it looks a little bit messy and looks a little bit like grass. Right now I have all 3 colors on my brush, so incorporating the brown is definitely going to allow this to look much more natural than if you were just to use that bright yellow and the bright green. The brown gives it that dirt look and makes it look really nice and natural. And I don't consistently go across in rows or anything like that. I really like to just kind of bounce all around. So that way, again, I have some natural dark spots and some natural bright spots, just like it's going to be on the ground. But I am making sure I cover the whole thing. At some point in time, you might feel yourself wanting to dab it. That's fine. That too will give you a nice filled in look and a nice consistent look throughout the entire area. So if you want to dab it just to get that to fill in nicely, feel free to do so. Again, I'm getting right up into my sky, and I'm having that top area a little bit messy, so that way it looks like maybe that's some rough grass over there. And then I like to do it darker down at the bottom, so it almost looks like there's little shadows down as it gets down closer down towards the bottom of your canvas. I am going to hit the edges over here as well. And then again, I'm just still using this circular motion to get this on here. And then we will be switching brushes for the next step. I'm going to be switching to my small round brush. So after you get this step all nice and done, you can put this larger brush in your water cup, and you can take out the small pointy or small round brush in preparation for the next step. All right, so we're going to be using the small round brush for the next step. What we're going to be doing is we're just going to be almost sketching ourselves a circle for the inside of your Dazzling Daisy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be using yellow paint at this point, and figuring out where I want this center to go. It is about the size of a large softball maybe, or like a grapefruit, and I have it somewhere in this vicinity. I have the bottom of it above my grass. So at some point I'm gonna maybe just mark maybe about a half of an inch above my grass. And I really just want to do a circle. So it doesn't have to be a perfect circle. You could, if you needed to, you could make dots all around it and then connect the dots. You could grab an object and just trace it, but for me, I'm just gonna go for it. So I'm gonna start in through here. You can always make it bigger. You can't really make it smaller once you get it on there. So I'm gonna look at this and say, I think I want it just a little bit bigger maybe, because this is gonna be a really dazzling daisy. So I want this to be kind of big. And then once you get it on here, whatever size you're comfortable with, all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be using yellow and white. I picked up a little bit of white, and I'm just gonna color it in. We're not doing anything fancy with the technique here. I just wanna get a coat on here that we'll be able to use as our base coat for later when we make it all nice and fancy and have dimension in it. So I just used that brush to get this colored in with yellow and white. The white is gonna make it so it's not so translucent, and it'll cut any risk of that blue showing through later. So I just added a little bit of white into it. And then the next step, we're gonna actually switch brushes to your flat brush. So when you get done with this step, you can put your small brush in your water cup, and you can take out the number 6 flat brush in preparation for the next step. All right, so for the next step, we are going to be doing our first layer of the petals. I'm gonna be using my flat number 10 brush, and I will be using brown and white. I'm actually gonna be pre-mixing a tan color. This is gonna be the color that I use for my first layer of these petals. And the reason why I'm using a tan color instead of white is because it's gonna provide us with, again, a really natural base to these petals. And then later, when we go to add a highlight and some shadow, we'll have a wonderful complementary mid color to use as our base. So once I've come up with a shade of tan that I like, it's just a nice light, like creamy color. What I'm gonna do is I like to kind of mentally map out where my petals are gonna go. I know that I want this flower to almost be bending a little bit and like it's looking at the sun over here, or it's kind of growing over here. So I know for me, I want to do my petals a little bit on the shorter side on the left and longer on the right. And they don't all have to be exactly the same shape. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna kind of start making my shapes for my petals. You can certainly modify these as you go. I'll color them in a minute, but this is just kind of giving me a jump start as to if I want them to be of a different shape after, or different size ratio or anything after I've got them all on here. And you can see some are longer, some are a little bit more pointy. I do bring them right to the base of the center of the flower. And I am going right into my grass because they're going to be hanging right over that grass. You can have some really big ones, because these ones, again, for me, are going to be the closer ones. So I want them to kind of be bigger on this right side. Maybe I've got a big one coming down in through here. Then I'm going to get them to be maybe a little bit smaller as they come over on this left-hand side. And again, you can see I'm not really super consistent with the shape of them. But daisy petals are going to be long, and they kind of flop over, and they can tend to go in different directions and be different sizes. Gravity is definitely going to take over, so that's where this droopiness comes into play on them. And again, I've got maybe one over here. Maybe this one here is going to be a little smaller one. Maybe it just hasn't fully grown like the rest of them. And then maybe I'm going to have a nice nice kind of larger one up and through here. And then once I've got them kind of where I want, I think I want this one to be a little bit bigger. Maybe this a little bit. So once I feel pretty confident as to where they are and what kind of shape I've got them in, I'm just going to use that same color that I've pre-mixed, and I'm going to color them in. It doesn't have to be in any particular thickness. You can do it thin or thick because we're going to be waiting a while. We're going to have several steps before we come back and put the final coat on this. But you do want it to kind of be a consistent stroke throughout that particular petal. So as you can see, I'm just kind of working the paint, you know, in the same direction that I feel that the petal is falling. And I'm using this flat brush, and I don't use a ton of pressure because I want this to almost, especially when it comes to this green area, I want it to really act as like a primer coat and cover that green nicely. But you can see it'll still show through at this point because that green is really dark. And acrylic paint tends to be translucent or see-through, which is why we're going to do multiple layers on these petals. But we're definitely just starting with this base coat, and it'll dry. You do want to bring it, like I said, right up to the center of the flower, but if you don't get them all to hit the center of the flower, that's all right. If you want to bump that out a little bit, maybe give it a little bit more size there. I think I'm gonna make this one just a little bit bigger. See, and you can just modify as you go based on visually what you're seeing. But I'm digging this, so that's gonna be the conclusion of that step. What I'm gonna do next is we're gonna be switching brushes to the small brush, so the small pointy brush, so you can put this one in your water cup and you can wash your round brush and get ready for the next step. All right, so the next step we're going to be using your small pointy brush. We're going to be doing the grass and the stems for your little colored flowers that you that are going to be strewed about. I will be using primarily brown, but I'm also going to be using yellow as well. And if you want to get them brighter, you could certainly use white. But I'm going to start with brown. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of my stems into place. I know I definitely want a stem coming for this flower here, so I'm just going to put it somewhere down here, which is a pretty obvious place to put it. And then what I'm going to do is, I think I just said brown and yellow, but you can also use green as well. But I'm starting with brown, and what I'm doing at this point is I'm just going to be almost flicking my brush to give myself some long and some short pieces of grass. These are going to act as grass and stems for your flowers. If you want some longer ones, I know that I'm going to want a couple poking out up here, so I'm going to put a stem or two up in through here. It's going to hide behind this one for me. Maybe I have something poking out over here, which means it's got to connect somewhere, so I can put it down and through there. You can certainly have some additional ones down here if you want. Let's see, do I want any over here? Maybe a couple in through here. Once you get where you want with the brown, then you can start incorporating. Maybe you do a couple of green pieces. The brown I just really like to use because it's pretty dramatic and you're going to be able to see it really well on top of these other colors. But now that I've got brown and green, I want to add a little bit of sunshine to some of these. So all I do is I put yellow on my brush, and you can almost just go down the side of some of these pieces of grass, and it really adds like a nice brilliant kind of highlight to them. You don't really necessarily have to go down here because you already have a lot of yellow down there, but if you wanted these to really look like there's sunshine hitting them, you can just take that yellow and go right down the side of it, and that's going to add a wonderful piece of sunshine on these just blades of grass or these stems that you have going on. And then once you're done with that, we are going to use this round brush for the next step, but you'll want to wash it and dry it. So wash and dry it to get ready for the next step. All right, so the next step, I'm working with my small pointed brush. I'm going to be creating my flowers that are going to be just kind of strewed about here. The three colors that I'm going to be using are white, orange, and yellow. And what I first do is I'm going to be putting all three colors on my brush at the same time. So I have all three colors. And what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to make myself an imaginary shape. This doesn't have to be a shape of any particular flower that you know, ooh, I want one here too. I'm going to add a stem there later. I just noticed that I would like one over here. So this is kind of like an oblong kind of shape, almost like a little tulipy shape. But these are just made up in my head. That one's a little bit too orange for me, so I just added a little more yellow and white for it. And you can see they can be a variety of shades. Maybe I have one in through here, maybe I've got a little one in through here, but I'm using all three of these colors initially, so that way when I'm going to be adding a highlight on them in a minute, I'll have this mid-tone to work as my my base color for it. And I guess if you wanted to put a couple in the ground, you could certainly do that as well. But once you get this initial layer on there, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to use just the orange color, and I'm going to put the orange at the bottom of the flower. So this is going to act as like the shadow at the bottom of it. And because it's the darkest of the three colors, it's really going to add a nice effect to it. So again, I'm just using that darkest orange at the bottom part of this flower. And I'm using quite a bit of paint. I'm almost just kind of letting it be really heavy on the canvas so it'll add a nice, like almost textured effect. Then I'm just wiping my brush off on my paper towel, and I'm going to go into the white, and I'm adding a highlight at the top of that flower now. So now that I've got the darkness underneath and I've got this beautiful highlight at the top, they're going to almost appear as if they're three-dimensional on your canvas, just because you've given it such dimension with these, with the shadow and the highlight. And then once I'm all set with this, because I have a missing stem, you will probably be done with your step, but I'm going to add that missing stem up here. So I just wiped my brush. I'm going in for a little bit of brown paint, and I'm just gonna add a little stem there with a little yellow next to it. And then what we're going to be doing for the next step is we're going to be switching brushes back to that large bristle brush. So you can put your small pointy one in your water cup, and you can take out the large one in preparation for the next step. All right, so for the next step, we're using your bristle brush. We're going to be finishing the center of the flower. I'm going to be using yellow, white, and brown. And the goal here is to have the top of the center nice and bright, and the bottom you want to have it shadowed. So I'm going to start with white and yellow on my brush at the same time, and I'm going to be using a dabbing or a dotting technique, and I'm starting at the top. It's okay if you hit those petals a little bit. That's only going to make it look more natural. So go right to the edge and give it almost like a rough look at the edge. And I'm still just using yellow and white for this top part. As I come down in through, maybe about halfway down, you can start just using yellow. And at some point, you want to incorporate a touch of brown with your yellow, and you'll automatically see it start to get a little bit more dark. And I'm going to dot this all the way down to the bottom of this section. And then before I start going heavy-handed on my dark down at the bottom, I want to make sure that this center part is everything I had hoped it would be. So I'm adding a little bit more yellow and white back to my brush, and just lightly dabbing. If you over dab it, what will happen is it will all turn into the same color. So you can just keep adding almost thick paint to your brush, and just dab it a couple of times and move on. So that way you'll keep the texture to it and you'll keep the variety in colors on it, but it won't end up over blended. And so I'm adding a little bit more lightness up at the top, and I want to get this as pretty much the way that I want it before I start going into that dark brown. And I'm digging this, so I just wiped my brush off on my paper towel, and now I just picked up brown. So the brown, I'm gonna almost just underline this, the bottom part here, and then I'm gonna start dabbing it into the center here. So that way it almost gives you a faded effect where it's really nice and dark and shadowed down at the bottom. And again, you can certainly go into those petals a little bit if needed. And then I'm going to get it to just blend as it goes up into the brighter part of the flower. And after you're all said and done, you can certainly come back and do any little touch-ups if you feel like you need this darker or lighter, but at this point I'm pretty happy with that. So we're going to be switching brushes to the flat brush. So after you get done with this, you can put the big brush in your water cup and wash and dry your flat brush in preparation for the next step. All right, so the next step we're going to be using the flat brush. We're actually going to be finishing the petals of the flower. And what we've got to add is highlight and shadow to each petal. So the shadow is going to be where the petal is either turning, or it's hiding underneath another petal, or it's the little crease in the middle of the petal. That's where your shadows are going to go, or a shadow could go between two petals. The highlight is going to be the brightest part that is going to be from the sunshine, and these are predominantly white petals. So I will be using white as my highlight, and then I'm going to be using brown as my shadow. And at some point, even though I've kind of combined these two, at some point I will probably be using my original cream color as my middle ground if I need it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my brown just to kind of identify where I want my shadows to be. And so for me, I like to have like little shadows at the end of some of these petals, just so it looks like they're like curved under. And I will get these shadows to blend in with the rest of the flower, but this just kind of gives me an idea of where I want them, and blending them in with the rest later will be easy, but this is just going to kind of get me going and allow me to almost move a little bit freer on the petals as I go, because I've identified where I want those shadows to be. So right now I'm just kind of using the brown paint. I just hit the yellow a little bit, but that's all right. I don't want to lose myself in these petals either, so there's a couple that kind of overlap for me here. So I'm just kind of mentally keeping my mind straight as to what I want to happen with some of those. Over here, I don't necessarily need a ton of shadow because for me, my sun is over here, but I definitely know that I'm going to want a little bit of shadow as these petals kind of hit the interior of the flower here. So I'm just adding a little touch of brown as I go through there. Maybe I've got a little shadow at the tips of these petals because maybe they've curved under just a little bit and might not totally be seeing the sun. So you can really have fun with where you want these shadows to be. They don't have to be consistently exactly where mine are. You can certainly play with your technique a little bit and get them to show up where you want them to. So that's something that you can have fun with. But once I've kind of identified where those shadows go, I don't wash my brush. I'm just going to start using white paint and getting a nice coat of the brightness onto these petals. You might need to go over them twice. If the first coat doesn't cover the way that you want it to, you might need to do it twice, but I'm going to do a full round of one layer and then see what I need to do after that, because I'm sure I'm going to need to do another layer. But at this point, I'm still just picking up white, and I have the remnants of the brown on my brush from when I did the shadow. So that works well because it will definitely help me to get these shadows to blend in together. And you can take that white and go right over your shadows too, because the white will be translucent, so you'll be able to see right through it. And those shadows will still appear because they're going to be nice and dark. But you can see right now I'm just using the white paint to get these petals to be nice and bright, and I'm going right over that shadowed area. And again, because I have the remnants of the brown on my brush, it is still kind of a creamy color. It's not predominantly that vibrant white that we are going to be looking for at the end, but this is definitely giving me a beautiful layer to work with. And you can see how I almost outlined that petal, and I'm still just kind of working my way around the flower, getting all of these this layer of lightness to work. And I do go right over that shadow just so it starts to blend together. And just a couple more over here with this layer of brightness. And I'm not using super thick paint at this point because I do want it to dry relatively fast, so that way as I make my way around the flower, by the time I get back to that first flower I've done, it'll be dry, and that allows me to just keep building layers on top of layers, which is how this ends up looking nice and full, and like it's got good dimension throughout each petal. So that, and of course, as I said that, I used a ton of paint, but I wiped it off on my palette. So what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of working this paint in through here. I am, like I said, I'm going over that shadow part a little bit just so it looks like it belongs to the same petal, and it doesn't look like it's a disconnected piece. I can always add more shadow to it, but that was one time around, and then I'm going in again. So I'm gonna do a little bit more enhancement on my shadows. So maybe I didn't wash my brush. I'm just gonna go back in, and this time as I'm going on each petal, I'll probably finish each petal as I go. So I've got a nice dark shadow in through here, and then I just wiped my brush on my paper towel. I'm gonna hit it with some white now, and hopefully I've got this leaf to be the way that I want it. It's pretty good to me here. This shadow here is the shadow from the leaf next to it, or the petal next to it. And then this one I've still got some nice white on my brush, so I'm just gonna do that, add a little bit of enhancement on the shadow. And you can see this is just kind of a little building process here, and you can modify it as you go, but definitely you want to have some shadow on them. That's going to enhance the appearance of them being the true flower, true petals here, especially since you have lots of sunshine seemingly in this painting. So I've got some nice bright areas. I've got up here, I want to do some nice brightness in through here. And then I am going to, after I've got these petals all as bright as I wanted and fully identified with their shadows and their highlights, I will add a little bit of sunshine onto the tips of them. But I'm going to do that with yellow in just a minute. So let me just get my finished highlights and shadows on here. And you can see I keep wiping my brush off on my paper towel. That helps me to get these shadows to blend in with the brighter parts and make it look a little bit more natural. So I am a firm believer that you don't need to wash your brush all the time. So I definitely just kind of keep wiping my brush on my paper towel and getting these colors to blend in together, because I think they look more natural when you do it that way. But You might find that you're more comfortable just washing after every color and making sure that every color looks separate from one another. But for me, I definitely like to have a natural effect. So I will let my colors blend together and merge together and look harmonious with one another. So they look like Mother Nature created them and not my brush. Just adding a little bit more enhancement on these shadows in through here, and then I'm almost done with these. These take a couple of minutes to do. They take a little bit of finesse, but again, the biggest trick is just to identify where you want those shadows to go. Make sure that you get your petals as bright as you want them to be, or as dark as you want them to be. Maybe you want yours to really look like they're hiding in the shadows. You can certainly get some of them to be really nice and dark. And if you need to, one of my tips also on something especially like this is if you need something to dry, like let's say you've added a little bit too much paint and it's not drying the way that you want, and you really want it to dry so you can add another layer to it, just whip out a blow dryer. That definitely will help you to expedite the drying process and get you to move on to the next step if it's taken a little bit too long. And then I'm gonna just step back here, see if I want anything else with my shadows. I think I'm gonna just identify a little bit more in through here so they don't look disconnected. A couple of them felt a little disconnected to me. And then what I'm gonna do to finish these petals is I'm gonna put a touch of sunshine at the edge of them. So all I'm doing is I'm using my white with just a touch of yellow, and I'm not gonna do it on all of them. I'm just gonna do it like on the top left of a couple of these ones over here. And then that's it. It's just this really subtle little bit of sunshine that I'm putting over them. And just kind of on that top left-hand corner. And then there is one more step after you've gotten your daisy the way that you want it. It's gonna be done with your small brush. So after you're done with this, you can put the flat brush in your water cup and take out your small brush for the final step. All right, so the final step to any painting is to sign your name. So I'm gonna be using my small pointy brush. I usually sign it in the bottom left or the bottom right corner. You can sign yours wherever you want, but that's where I'm signing mine. For this painting, I'm gonna be using brown, and I'm just going to be, I like to sign my initials. So I'm gonna be signing my initials. You could put a date, you could put whatever identifying mark that you'd like onto it, and that piece there. All right, so that's going to conclude this painting. I hope you enjoyed the process. I hope you love your Dazzling Daisy painting, and I look forward to painting with you again sometime.